A small pair of feet slapped against the wet pavement as a little girl ran down the street, crying so hard she could barely breathe. Her voice cracked through the night. "Help! Somebody help my mama!" People heard her. Doors cracked open, curtains moved, but no one stepped outside. The girl kept running. Her hair was messy, her cheeks soaked with tears, and her tiny chest rose and fell as she struggled to breathe. Then she saw the place. A restaurant glowing with dim yellow lights. Several black cars were parked outside. Men in dark suits stood near the entrance. The girl didn't stop to think. She ran straight through the door. The moment she burst inside, every conversation stopped. Forks froze in midair, glasses paused halfway to lips. The room was filled with dangerous-looking men, and at the center of the room sat the one man no one dared interrupt, the most feared mafia boss in the entire city. The girl ran straight to his table, crying uncontrollably. "Please, please help me," she sobbed. The men around the table immediately stood up. "Hey, kid, you can't—" But the girl shouted again before anyone could grab her. "They're beating my mama!" The entire restaurant went silent. The mafia boss slowly looked down at her. His name was Marco De Luca, a man known for making people disappear, a man the police had tried to catch for years. No one had ever seen anyone interrupt him like this and walk away. One of his bodyguards stepped forward. "Boss, I'll get her out of here." Marco raised his hand. The man stopped immediately. Marco leaned forward in his chair. The little girl's eyes were red and swollen from crying. Her hands trembled. "What did you say?" Marco asked calmly. The girl wiped her nose with her sleeve. "They're beating my mama," she cried again. "They won't stop." Marco studied her face. "Who is beating her?" "Some men," she said through sobs. "They came to our house. They keep hitting her." The men at the table shifted uncomfortably. One whispered under his breath, "This isn't our problem." Marco ignored him. "What's your name, little one?" he asked. "Sophie," she sniffled. "How old are you, Sophie?" 7. "And where's your mama?" "At our apartment, 2 streets away." Her voice shook. "They said she owes them money." One of Marco's lieutenants frowned. "Loan sharks, probably," he muttered. Sophie grabbed Marco's sleeve. "Please," she cried. "They're hurting her." The restaurant remained completely silent. Everyone waited to see what Marco would do. A man like him didn't involve himself in strangers' problems. Marco slowly pushed his chair back. The scraping sound echoed through the room. He stood up. His men straightened immediately. Marco looked down at Sophie. "Did anyone else help you?" She shook her head. "I knocked on doors," she whispered. "Nobody came." Something flickered in Marco's expression. Then he turned to his men. "Finish your drinks later," he said calmly. "We're going somewhere." Several of them exchanged confused looks. "Boss? For this?" one asked quietly. Marco looked at him. That was enough to silence him. "Keys," Marco said. Within seconds, the restaurant exploded into movement. Chairs pushed back. Phones came out. Men rushed toward the door. Sophie stood frozen as the powerful men suddenly began preparing to leave. Marco looked at her. "Show me where." 10 minutes later, a line of black cars rolled through the neighborhood. The quiet street filled with the sound of engines. Neighbors peeked through their windows. People whispered nervously. "Why are those cars here?" Inside the first car, Sophie pointed ahead. "That building," she said. Marco looked at the small apartment complex. As the cars stopped, shouting could already be heard from upstairs. A woman screamed. Sophie's face turned pale. "That's my mama!" She jumped out of the car and ran toward the building. Marco followed immediately. His men moved with him. When they reached the apartment door, It was slightly open. Inside, chaos. A woman lay on the floor trying to shield her face. Two large men stood over her. One of them kicked her side. "Where's our money?" he shouted. "I told you," the woman cried weakly. "I just need more time." "You've had enough time." The man raised his hand again. Then a calm voice spoke behind them. "That's enough." The room went quiet. Both attackers turned. Marco De Luca stood in the doorway. Behind him were 8 men in dark suits. The attackers' faces drained of color. "Oh, hell," one of them whispered. Everyone in the city knew who Marco was. The man slowly lowered his hand. "Mr. De Luca," he said nervously. Marco stepped inside the apartment. His eyes moved to the woman on the floor, then to Sophie standing beside him. The girl ran to her mother. "Mama!" The woman hugged her tightly despite the pain. "Sophie, you came back." Marco looked at the attackers again. "You hit a mother," he said quietly. Neither man spoke. "In front of her child." Still silence. Marco took another step forward. The room felt smaller. "Who are you working for?" Marco asked. The taller man swallowed. "Vincent Caruso." Marco's expression hardened. He knew the name, a small-time loan shark who had been expanding too aggressively. Marco glanced at one of his men. "Call Vincent." The attacker quickly raised his hands. "Wait! Mr. De Luca, we were just doing our job." Marco's voice stayed calm. "Your job is beating women?" No, she just owes money." "How much?" The men hesitated. $3,000, one finally admitted. Marco looked at the woman. "Is that true?" She nodded weakly. "I borrowed it for medical bills," she whispered. "I tried to pay, but I lost my job." Marco turned back to the attackers. "And your solution was this?" No one answered. Marco reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick stack of cash. He counted quickly, then tossed the money onto the table. $3,000, he said. The attackers stared at the money. "Your debt is paid." The room was silent. One of the attackers slowly stepped forward. "So, we can take it?" Marco's men immediately stepped closer. The attacker froze again. Marco looked him directly in the eyes. "You can take it," Marco said calmly, "but you're going to deliver a message to Vincent." The man nodded quickly. "Anything?" Marco's voice turned colder. "Tell him if I ever hear about him sending men to beat mothers again." He paused. The silence became heavy. "He won't like how that conversation ends." The attackers nodded frantically. "Yes, sir." Marco gestured toward the door. "Leave." They didn't hesitate. Within seconds, they rushed out of the apartment, down the hallway, out of the building. When the door closed, the tension in the room finally broke. Sophie's mother looked at Marco with disbelief. You paid it?" Marco shrugged slightly. "It's done." Tears rolled down the woman's face. "I don't know how to thank you." Marco didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched down in front of Sophie. "You were brave," he told her. She wiped her eyes. "I was scared." "Being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared," Marco said softly. "It means you act anyway." Sophie hugged him suddenly. The powerful Mafia boss froze in surprise. His men looked at each other. They had never seen anything like this. Marco slowly patted the girl's back. "Your mama is safe now," he said. "If this story moved you so far, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment below where you're watching from. Your support helps stories like this reach more people." Marco stood up again. He turned to his men. "Get a doctor here," he said quietly. One of them nodded and stepped outside to make the call. Sophie's mother struggled to sit up. "Why would you do this for us?" she asked. Marco looked at the small apartment, the worn furniture, the frightened child. Then he spoke quietly. Because someone should have helped. A few minutes later, Marco and his men prepared to leave. Sophie followed him to the door. "Mr. Marco?" He looked down at her. "Yes? Are you a bad guy?" The men behind him shifted uncomfortably. Marco thought for a moment. Then he smiled faintly. "Sometimes." Sophie tilted her head. "But tonight, you were a hero." Marco didn't respond. He simply nodded once and walked toward the waiting cars. As the engines started and the convoy drove away, neighbors slowly stepped outside. They whispered in disbelief. No one had expected the most feared man in the city to do something like that. Inside the apartment, Sophie held her mother's hand. "Mama," she said softly. "Yes, sweetheart?" "The scary man wasn't scary." Her mother smiled weakly. "Sometimes people surprise us. And sometimes, the man everyone fears the most is the only one willing to stand up when it matters." If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more powerful stories like this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves emotional storytelling. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Marco's place?